We like to believe ourselves separate from nature. That's why you look up the Oxford English Dictionary and it says nature is everything in the world around us. It's minerals, plants, animals, everything except humans or anything humans have created. And so literally in the definition of nature, we wrote ourselves and anything we created right out of it. That's obviously not true. We are nature. We are nature expressing itself. And so why did nature express itself in a species that would ultimately take itself to a state of infertility and chronic disease to predict its own death, and in the process destroy the earth beneath its feet? Because nature wants to die over and over again, because it's in the death toll that we get to erase the memory of the previous iterations of life, and we get a new physical opportunity that then leads to a new biologic opportunity. And so that's the moment we are in, I believe, right now, is nature has devised a death moment for a rebirth to create something that has never existed before.
Whenever you're ready, brother.
Just begin with a statement of gratitude to this nature that has imagined us into this reality, and recognize the multifaceted intelligences that have been present on this earth to contribute to that creative process to bring us forward from this extraordinary explosion of energy that we call biology, this planet that has harbored its potential for life for these billions of years. And we recognize the patience of nature. We recognize the iterative process in which nature is always willing and seemingly almost eager to die so that it can birth again. We recognize that patience, and we give gratitude for the deep trust of existence that supersedes the visible world that this nature seems to know so well. The way in which a bird gives up its sovereignty for a moment to be captured by the fish that jumps into its talons. And that fish gives up itself to become part of the eagle again. Just recognize this eagerness for death, this eagerness for transformation, this eagerness for one to surrender its path to be in service to another for a moment, such that it can be heightened in the receiving of the other. It's a mysterious dance that we play as sovereign beings of the divine. It's mysterious that we are able to surrender and receive simultaneously. It's mysterious that those two accelerate the cycle of gift and surrender. I'm so grateful to be here with Emilio and in conversation with each of you listening. There's a presence here that we can create. We literally can agree on the reality that we manifest together. We do not need to adopt or bring forward a past iteration or version of that reality. We can agree for a new reality. And in so doing, create this reality, this beauty that we are capable of feeling. My prayer is that each of us in this time together would be able to surrender our five senses and feel deeper into our bodies to experience intuition, the vibrations of knowingness within us, the vibrations of clarity and truth that guide us. Surrendering the five senses that have convinced us that we are separate from all things, so that we can feel into the reality of our other seven senses that live deep within our bodies, to know that we are connected to all things and that all things are expressing itself through us. I'm so grateful to be able to co-create a new reality with each of you. It is a reality that has been already spun forward and backwards by our higher selves. It is a reality that we can simply let emerge now in front of us, around us, within us. This new reality is probably quite ancient in its existence, but is new in our experience. The inquiry that we might go into here is at that deep self level, as you expand back out from that core truth, from that core feeling, that deep intuition. Are you able to start to feel? Are you able to start to experience what it feels like to bring that truth, that vibration into your current state of being? And as you do that, what becomes obvious for you that you need to let go of? What beliefs and value systems, what methods of safety or methods of comfort have you adopted that are keeping you from the freedom and the power that's in the resonance within you? Can you release the fear of being yourself? Can you release the fear of allowing this magnificence within you to emerge? Recognize that the fear is not so much of knowing what you're capable of, but it's fear of what you're going to have to let go of to let that truth emerge, to let yourself express yourself at the highest level. The relationships around you have likely been put together to try to create the perception of your capacity to resist change. So the invitation is for you to accept change. Recognize that all of the relationships around each of us have been constructed to try to palliate and to reassure ourselves that the dream we are living in is real. And so we need to look at these relationships deeply and ask ourselves, what are we manifesting around ourselves to keep ourselves within the current dream? What are we resisting in those relationships? Are we willing to let go of those relationships or the current constructs of those relationships to allow those relationships to grow, to actually expand, to hold more space for the individuals within those relationships to become a more full expression of themselves? My prayer is that you will find those avenues. My prayer is that you will experience a more full and complete version of yourself. That you will be awestruck by your capacity to know your path, your truth. May we find in our stillness today such inspiration for staying alive in these bodies, and then bring in these deeper truths and vibrations into these bodies, that we would change the conformational structure of the water within us, erasing the 40 generations of trauma before us as held within our water, within our DNA. We now have the opportunity to erase that, and a willingness to die to the traumas, to the past, to the history of humanity, and become something new. Can we become so still that our stillness acts as an eraser on the whiteboard of life? That stillness suddenly creating fresh canvas, clean slate for you to paint upon. All of your frustrations, all of your disappointments, all came out of expectations that were mental constructs and not real. As soon as you let go of the expectations, the hard feelings and the inadequacies and the sense of injustice, all of it evaporates into the cleanliness of a new whiteboard, a new white canvas for you to move forward on without expectations, but with great anticipation. grateful to be with each of you. Grateful to be with you, Emilio. I'm honored to be witness to your next chapter as it unfolds, as you complete your training here in the academic environment to start to birth a wisdom within the constructs of those skills that you've obtained. May it serve you well to live your purpose. May all of the learning experience supersede the education. May the learning and the experiential journey therein erase the constructs and beliefs of other people's programming that has been built into an education system. May you find freedom in your own knowledge and your own wisdom, your own knowingness that supersedes all of the human constructs of knowledge. Blessings on you, brother.
Zach Bush, officially welcome on Just Happen, brother. It's an honor. It's an honor, a pleasure to see you again. We always like to start off with the energy of excitement and joy. So I'd love to ask you, what are you most excited about right now in your life?
Me. Gotten pretty excited about me recently. I've been involved in lots and lots of big projects over the last couple of decades, and it's been really extraordinary and blessed. And I have many projects that are beautiful to watch unfold as it goes this year. But for the first year, I answer that as me. I'm really, really intrigued about what the hell is happening in me right now. And I'm really excited to see if I can change more radically than I ever have before. And I'm really curious to see why I've constructed my current situation. It's challenging me so deeply. And I'm so curious to see why am I, what do I know already that I'm constructing the change of relationships around me, the change of duties around me, the change of identity within myself. Like, I'm just so intrigued by that. So excited to discover what I must already know somewhere in my being. And it's going to be an intriguing couple of years ahead.
It is, and especially with this powerful prophecy that you've spoken about of the decade of 2017 all the way to 2027, which we're only a couple of years away from. And you say that it's a time when humanity will lose and give away these aspects of itself of fear, shame, guilt, separation from nature. Where do you see that we're currently at in this prophecy? In general, where do you see we're at?
I mean, the interesting thing about, these timelines that are put into prophetic, channels and everything else is that they probably are far more powerful and true when we let go of the timelines that they're trying to put them in. So, the Mayan calendar wrapped up in 2012 and basically proclaiming the end of an epoch that was maybe 40 to 70,000 years old. And the many other indigenous cultures around the world have been preparing for this dissolution of all things and the recrystallization within our cocoon, and then the metamorphosis therein, and then the rebirth of our humanity has all been predicted through so many different channels. And the interesting thing is, as we try to consider where are we at in that journey, the only place we can actually be is present. The concept of a future or a 2027 is a wholly kind of, fourth dimensional phenomenon. Like we have to believe the universe stops at 4 dimensions if we're going to believe that 2027 is in the future. And the 2017 is in the past, whatever it is. So there's this interesting reality that this has already come to be. The entire prophecy was seen, and it was seen because it has already happened in the 5th dimension, 17th dimension, anything beyond that 4th dimension where you start to release the perception of a linear time frame. and suddenly everything is in relationship to itself within a constellation rather than some linear timeline. And so we are in a constellation of experiences that could be called future, could be called past, but in fact they're all part of this hologram of the universe that we're in here, which is so fascinating to me that in every single pixel of a hologram you can see the whole of the image of the hologram, right? And so the now that we're in right now is holding the whole vision of where we came from. What is the beginning of time? What is God? What is a cosmos? What are the universes within that cosmos? What are these galactic structures within those universes? What's the vacuum space and its meeting within those universes, and how does it manifest physical nature out of those? What is God? How is that expressing itself right now? What is the future of the universe in its collapse, in its return to self, in its return to singularity? All of that is a constellation that's all aware, it's entangled at the quantum physics level. So all things are happening right now: the birth of the universe, the death of the universe, the birth of me, the death of me right now. And we are given this capacity to experience all of that because we have an energy field that is eternal. We have an energy field that cannot be destroyed. And so at the beginning of energy was us, at the beginning of the coherence that has come out of true chaos of the cosmos. We have the ability to experience all that, to know all that, to have been there at the beginning of time. And so when we drop into these still places, especially in community, like we did in Egypt together, when you are with 40 people who are willing to die 1,000,000 times to themselves and let go of all of the human constructs of value systems and the abstract belief systems about identities and the beliefs of the biologic source. This is a big wound in our psyche, I think, is that we believe we are biologic and we come from our mother and father. We come from DNA. All of that's impossible because the DNA doesn't actually hold a map of how a three-dimensional body knits itself together in the womb of its mother. All of that is held within the energy field, not within the biology. And so we're physical beings rather than biologic beings. And the physics behind that has shown us in the first law of thermodynamics, you cannot create or destroy energy. And so we have this phenomenon where our energy field that does allow for a template to emerge, an idea of three-dimensionality, fifth dimensionality, 17th dimensionality. All those things are held in this quantum truth of the fact that we are physics beings before we are biologic beings. And when you start to trust that and know that the science is there to prove it if you need that, but once you start to trust that you are actually bigger than your physical body, or you are much more ancient and future than your physical body can now present in a three-dimensional expression, then you start to know how to listen. And we had 40 people that were learning and are steadily getting better and better at listening to that vibrational reality of who they are, that vibrational coherence that is what predated the biologic expression in the womb, the emergence of an infant, the growth of a human, the decay and death of a human. That energy field has all of the information in it of all things that have ever happened because it's quantum entangled with all things that have ever happened. And I believe that will be the schools of the future. We will stop educating our children and we will start letting them learn. Each of you have been indoctrinated through your education to disconnect from your energy reality. And you have been indoctrinated into an understanding of a three-dimensional world that has very base, low vibration, experiences that anchor us in a story right now. And we're stuck in this story, which could be called a dream. And it's so vague and weird. It's the stuff that we do, the stuff we agree to believe in, makes absolutely no sense on so many levels. It makes absolutely no sense that an Israeli government and the leadership therein finds it relevant, let alone justified, to go and slaughter to extinction a neighboring community, is impossible that community would be so isolated from the world that it would come to be radicalized in such a way that it would inspire such hate and such anger. These things are ludicrous. These things are absolutely phenomenally ludicrous. And then on the other levels, when we start to look at the concept of safety or health that are put around, the fact that we all accepted, and I know there's a few of you that tried to reject this reality, but the fact is we all co-created a situation where, in the name of health, we all went into isolation. And we became scared of each other. We became scared of our own families. We became scared of the air we breathe. We became scared of everything. And so the fear paradigm of the pandemic, had such ludicrous things that a lot of us were talking about. A lot of us were laughing about. A lot of us were trying to, grieve. The fact that, you could stand up in a restaurant and suddenly be at risk. You had to put your mask on, but you could sit down and eat dinner and no problem. Take the mask off. So these viruses that only hover, 5-6 feet off the ground. I mean, what ridiculous things we come to adopt as social norms so quickly. And we did that. Like, I wore a mask in the airports, everything else, so I could get through there, so I could move without resistance in a world of fake realities. But by putting the mask on, I reinforced that reality. And so we're all doing ludicrous things every day to reinforce this dream state that we're in. I do it by drinking. I don't actually need to drink water right now. I can go a month without drinking. And yet in medical school, I'm taught if you don't drink for 3 days, you die. Except you can just go to Thailand and meet monks that are doing, dry fasting in dark caves for 40 days, and they're fine. And so doctors, scientists are told, well, you can only live for 3 days without water. Well, who developed that? Like, who said that? Like, what? Where's the evidence of that? And the answer is nothing. It's like this kind of mythical story. And yet I feel thirst, and so I drink, and so I reinforce in my own belief system that I always need to drink. I need to change my relationship to my three-dimensional world, where I realize the three-dimensional world is not there to sustain me. It's there for my pleasure. That's it. I need to drink water only because I find it pleasurable. And tea is like my favorite freaking thing on the planet. I drink tea all the time. I love tea. And as long as I'm in right relationship with the tea, this is a plant that is interacting with my neurology to create a vibration of pleasure so that we can both go on a journey of ecstasy. Both me and the plant can go on that co-created journey. Now I'm drinking tea for the right reason. But if it's like, oh my gosh, I need to stay hydrated so that I don't have wrinkles and don't look like I'm aging, or I need to drink because my body will die without water right now. That's the difference between that fear, kind of guilt, that scarcity model of water, and this abundance model of, actually, my body is super good at recycling water. In fact, it can create water because it can breathe. And if I can breathe air in, I can convert that to water in my bloodstream. We know that science is actually relatively basic. But hydrogen, oxygen can be transmuted into liquids within the energy field, within the energetic capacity of the human body. So why are we here? It's just that journey. So Emilio, I want you to reflect on that for us a little bit. Is if this is a decade that's all happening at once, it's already happened in the future, it's already happened in the past, and we're going to lose fear, guilt, and shame, what's that going to look like in your life? What does that feel like when you hear that you actually completed your education at the moment that you have the option to go do this? What's that going to look like in your life?
Yeah. And the first thing I think of is, one of the things that most caused that guilt in many people that I know, and for myself sort of included, is that belief that there is this judgmental God or this judgmental universe, that there's a right or wrong, and that whatever we do, there's going to be a repercussion of that, and there could be a consequence of that action. And of course, I believe that, the universe is reflecting our actions to us constantly. But when we come from the place of, I can do no wrong, I can do no harm, then I cannot be in guilt of anything, because it's all a teaching, it's all a learning. If Earth is a school, if we're here as souls learning consistently from everyone else around us and from the experiences that we create, then there can be no separation from myself and the experience that I just brought onto my life. I think that the world will largely, stay the same, but the systems that come out of that consciousness are going to be very different, because we're not going to be in that relationship that you talked about, of being in right relationship. What is being in right relationship to nature? And that's a huge topic that you've unfolded. Being in right relationship with the people around us, being in right relationship with the food that we eat, the water, how you mentioned that the water structure is changing our biology, is changing our cells. I'm excited. I mean, there's just a lot of optimism in knowing that even if I change like a slight degree in my perception of, I'm not separate from this person on the other side of the screen, or I'm not separate from the animal that I'm witnessing out in Africa. I know you went to Africa and you were witnessed by a lion. If we're not separate from that, then there's this interconnectivity that unfolds for us. And I think it'll be just a beautiful process of us realizing that we are those messengers of the universe that is already unified. And we've just, in our belief systems, dropped out of that largely.
Yeah. I think that we've dropped out of it by this deep agreement that we must have made a long time ago to believe this other reality. Something happened in human history quite recently to create this wound. I go back and forth on this in my own feeling towards it. When I feel into it, I feel two possibilities. I feel that the wound of human separateness, our belief of separate from nature, happened 300,000 years ago at the emergence of this shift in our trust or perception of the five senses. So when the physical reality in the 3D became our dominant guide, we suddenly lost our deeper sense of connectivity to the sunrise, to the sunset, to the tree above us, to the bird flying overhead. But when we sit with Indigenous peoples who remember their Indigenous wisdom, it feels like they experienced a very long period of time in their history where they were not believing in the separateness or living a life that reinforced our belief of separateness. And then about 5,000, 7,000 years ago, suddenly it looks like all of these oral histories, this Khoisan people of Africa have a 100,000-year oral history. The First Nations peoples of North America, 40,000 years. The Aboriginal and Maori people of Australia, New Zealand, 40,000 years. So we have tens of thousands of years of history on continents all over the world with these deep, long oral traditions, oral histories. And then suddenly an amnesia happened where we cannot remember what happened 5,000, 7,000 years ago, in which things all shifted. And so there was maybe a collective event that occurred late in our development as humanity to really drive this wound to its current expression. Maybe there was an initial wound and then it deepened 5,000 years ago. I don't know. But I am very intrigued by the fact that we have this sudden break in technology, this sudden break in, and by technology, I just mean artistic expression that was capable of working on levels we aren't capable of now. We have weird narratives and stories about this in more recent history, that we believe we can forget technologies is amazing. If you ask NASA, why haven't we been back to the moon since 1969? Why don't we have the technologies we had in 1969 when we got to the moon? Their answer is, well, that technology was lost. What? Like that's the professional narrative you all have been told to share with the world, is you lost the technology to get to the moon. That seems really ridiculous, and yet they're super smart people. One of my best friends is an astronaut. He's the captain of the International Space Station this past year, and it was his second long tour up there. And so there's astronauts. They go somewhere, they have an experience, super intelligent, and yet they can buy into a narrative that isn't real. It's just not real. And so I feel the same thing about my field of medicine, is that any doctor who's really sat at the bedside of somebody dying and has really listened into that situation is going to experience something greater than that physical body. And they're going to have to come to terms with the fact that there's something that outlasts that body, that still has self-identity to it. And they're going to see that patient in a coma suddenly wake up and tell them what was just happening on the other side of the physical veil, which ancestors are in the room, what conversations are being had, what wisdoms are being seen, what patterns in their life can they now suddenly see, what judgment are they now letting go of on their own journey to suddenly reconcile themselves with their children that have been estranged from them for decades. Through a few words, they can create massive healing, massive reconciliation, massive joy. And all of the near-death experiences that I've been around over the years, as a hospice doctor, I was admitting 80 patients a week to die. I did that for 4 years. And then hear thousands and thousands of people that are dipping in and out across the veil of the three-dimensional reality that we've come to believe in. And they all say such similar things. And sometimes there's extraordinary stories that unfold of these great journeys that are taken on the other side of the veil in the period of time that they are allow themselves to be freed from their belief that they are only this physical body. And they go do extraordinary things in the universe, and then they come back into the body to tell us about it. But in not a single near-death experience that I've ever heard, and then I experienced something kind of dramatic in my own life, 2010, that maybe would be considered something akin to this situation where I was gone for 7 minutes or something like that. And when you put this constellation and compilation together, you find out that not a single person lost track of their identity in those journeys. And that's just wild. It tells us something super important about reality, is that your identity does not rely on your connection to your five senses, does not rely on your connection to your job, your family as you see it with your constellation of parents and siblings and aunts, uncles, and does not rely on your friendships. It does not rely on anything in this three-dimensional world. Your identity is so solid, it is so coherent, that it's able to organize its reality around it. And so I'm intrigued as you are talking there, as I listen to you, I'm intrigued that there's this moment of freedom that your generation is getting much younger than I got. And I'm just so eager for that. I'm so hopeful that my own children get this, increasing opportunity at their young ages, in their 20s now. And I'm watching them do two realities in some ways, which is they're going through the motions of the normal milestones that have been handed to us for generations. Decide on your passion and purpose and go, try to match that to a schooling education journey, and then go, express yourself in the world and get married and have kids. And they're doing all of that. And it's amazing to see that happening in a generation where I've seen since they were born that they were seeing way more than I could at their respective ages. Both of them really tapped in some ways to their own trust in self. They knew very early on, single-digit ages, they knew what they were going to do with their lives. And then they did it. Like I would have told you at 7 years old exactly what I was going to be. I was going to be like a fireman, an astronaut, and 32 other things, but I didn't go do any of those things. the knowingness that they had of this is my path and I'm just going to go do this in single digits, and then they went and did that, is still one of my deeper mysteries of what's happening in your generation, what's happening in the generation beneath you, that's allowing such a rapid acquisition of knowingness of your path, and what's allowing my children's generation to reject all of the constructs that were handed to them on one level. Deep things like, what does it mean to have a gender? What does it mean to have sexuality? What does it mean to be on a timeline towards procreation? What is it? All of those have been rejected, and they're all recreating their own sense of reality and identity. And so I'm watching that, while superimposed on that is old patterns of behavior. And so I don't know when the explosion happens, but there has to be an explosion, because as they really crystallize those two realities, they cannot coexist. And so you are right at that, tipping point. Your generation, I think, is right at this tipping point of, so what do we create now? So what do we create now? You're being willing, my children, just a bit younger than you, are willing to let go of everything. Talking to my daughter the other day about just the instability in cities right now, and the instability of food systems, and just the need for all of us to have a little bit of cushion when crises happen. Have some water, have some food, have some path, so that you don't go into a fight or flight state when systems start to collapse around you. The water and the food are there to bring you into a creative space. You'll be fine for a couple of weeks without food. You can even survive that without water. You'll be uncomfortable because you haven't learned how to be relaxed in that state. And so the food and the water become that comfort structure that allows you, in a state of collapse around you, to be, in a space that you can create new opportunities for yourself. And so I do encourage each of you to think about that. What do I need to be in a peaceful space right now? Maybe I do need food. Maybe I do need water. Maybe I do need, some sort of comfort. So maybe I should have a tent. Maybe I should have, a pillow. What do you need to be in a creative space? And we can learn that takes less and less over time. And that's really freeing. What do you feel like, Emilio, in your life, like right now, like when you think, like you're traveling a ton, you're doing a lot of things that I didn't have the opportunity to do when I was your age. So you're seeing much more of the world. You're seeing a lot of things. So you're automatically more free of the concept of home than I think I was, committed to at the time. But when you start to think about what are those few things that really create a sense of, an adequate sense of safety so that you can be in a sense of creativity.
I love that because, Egypt really landed that for me. Because even going into this new year, I always set like a word as an intention for that year. And the year of 2023 for me was depth, like really going into the depth, whether that be in relationships, experiences, learning. And I got all of that. And then when I was looking for 2024, the word freedom kept coming up for me. And whether that be also financial freedom, whether that be just freedom in the way that I think, because I know a lot of people who I have a conversation with them, and the thought patterns are so ingrained and programmed in there that there's no freedom to be flexible and move like water does. And that's something that I've wanted to instill into myself that gives me that sense of creativity of, let me just explore different concepts. Let me explore someone's near-death experience. Let me explore someone that channels on the podcast. We've done a bunch of channeled shows as well. So for me, it's like what lies beyond. And I think it was, Matthias De Stefano came on the trip with us. He said, I think he was also channeling when he said this, but he said, it's not the answer that opens the mind, it's the question. So every time I ask a new question, my creativity expands or my mind expands. So I'm able to see more possibilities. And I think the more we begin to start asking newer questions, and I think our generation especially is asking all the questions that haven't been asked in many decades. And that's why things are shifting so rapidly. Do you see that also as well in the new questions that are being asked right now in the world?
Yeah, I see a duality in that, for all peoples at all times, at all things probably, but certainly it's really obvious right now just because the stark difference is so obvious now that these younger generations, yours included, I suppose, but even the one probably even more so below you. So, kids who are currently between the ages of 8 and 28, that generation right there is, and maybe you fit into that, but that young state right now is definitely challenging, the framework, because in some ways they're being allowed to be childlike longer, and there's lots of sociologic reasons for that, wealth, etc., and the rise of the middle class and all that. But there's more and more children that are being allowed to be in their childlike state where they don't have to right now and get a job and help support the family and all that, which even when I was young, it was pretty normal that kids were getting jobs to help generate some income for the family, or they were helping out at their family's companies or whatever it is. It was true for my son. My son worked at my side for years building my companies, and from age about 7 or 8, I was pretty reliant on his capacity to hold the end of the board when we built our house together, or help me troubleshoot a situation we'd gotten ourselves into on the engineering line for my biotech company. And by age 14, 15, he was running that system, and by the time he was 20, the entire company was so reliant on his troubleshooting and capacity to solve problems and all that. And so I can see him as this generative energy source of new questions, as you say there, of being able to see patterns in response to the questions and all that his older generations, despite far more experience in their field of engineering, wherever they are, he was showing them something of the problem solving capacity that was really beautiful to watch. But at the same time, the amount of monotone information flowing into that generation is limiting their imagination. I see this in spades happening in communities that should still have their deep indigenous roots. They're right in front of them. Spent time with the Achuar tribe down in Ecuador and saw this happening to this generation that's kind of 30 and below, sitting with this extraordinary shaman, that's carrying 40, 60,000 years of wisdom within that vessel of knowingness, within that oral tradition that they carry, within the plant wisdom they carry, within the wisdom of their ecosystems, the food forest that they built that we call the Amazon forest. All of these things are within this 75-year-old man, and his sons and grandsons are behind him in the jungle scrolling Facebook on their cell phones. And so that's the peoples that were most recently introduced to what we might call industrialized civilization. 1996 was first contact. So if it only took 20 years for that community to lose its capacity for visioning past the 3 dimensions and be locked into the 3-dimensional reality that then gives it a 2-dimensional screen to stare at. If your feed is 2-dimensional, communication is breaking down fundamentally. Communication is basically the connection of all energy. Energy is infinite. All energy is a form of information. All information is for the purpose of connection. That's what I learned in the jungle there. And yet I'm watching the opposite happen right in front of me in the same peoples that had delivered the deeper wisdom for me to connect to nature in the way that I did. And so it's this dichotomy, I think, that I'm seeing in your generation of, yes, asking new questions, but man, a 2-dimensional methodology for communication is eclipsing that so hard right now. And so maybe technology leaps suddenly to an AI, 5-dimensional world where suddenly technology is not being presented in a 2-dimensional way, and it allows us finally to dream big enough to ask those big questions that these young generations are having, and then we get to see this paradigm leap happen that way. Or maybe all things collapse and EMP bombs are dropped everywhere and the entire grid goes down and we no longer have cell phones to stare at, and we find ourselves asking those new questions in the context of our current state as human awareness with our reconnection to nature at that moment, and that's our leap forward. One of those is going to happen. We certainly are a completely unsustainable situation right now, so either the whole thing collapses and we go into our quantum nature with nature being our technology, or we get this stepwise process where our technology begins to express nature in ways that it currently doesn't, and then we become more intelligent for that, or more creative for that. I'm curious to see what you create. You actually have a master's degree now in this very space that we're talking about, the two-dimensional presentations. Saw a study that recently came out, and I'm not going to remember it well because I read it pretty quickly a couple weeks ago, but I found it fascinating because basically they were studying the brain patterns in communication through text message or through voice. Same information delivered by text or by voice, exact same sentences, all this, and the brain just was exponentially more lit by the verbal communication than it was the text. And when I look at my own behavior running, half a dozen companies and nonprofits and everything else by my cell phone, it boils down to a lot of text messaging. I keep in touch with my global community. I'm able to, through this technology, touch more friends than I ever could have without the technology. And yet my interaction with those friends is two-dimensional. Egypt was really special because we came together in the physical space. And this is, I think, what humans are being called to right now, is we need to be face-to-face if we're going to do our highest work. We need to get out of these two-dimensional interactions. And so Egypt was powerful because we went into a trust in the 17th dimension, and we're willing to bring that back into a three-dimensional expression of a physical body and then be present together. I was ecstatic that whole time. My body was so freaking wired. It was like a week-long orgasm. There was so much energy in the field, right? Your body is just pumping energy. I try to lay down and go to sleep, and then I'm like floating in space, and there's movement of energy everywhere. You're seeing things, you're feeling things. There's no plant medicine. There's no chemicals needed. Just the sheer amount of energy within those 40 people. I would drop back into my hotel room and lay there in the dark, and just the whole universe became visible. I could see what happened the night before in my room, as if my room was the king's chamber again, and I could see the whole constellation from like a third eye view. I am capable of becoming extra dimensional in my perception when I'm around people. I am capable of the most abject self-abuse, destructive behaviors in my isolation. And I typically go through that pattern a couple times a day. Isolated to reconnected. Isolated to reconnected. I don't know why I keep doing isolation, except that it has to do with the state of humans, I guess. Yeah, as I'm feeling into that, that's why I keep going into isolation, is because the human experience right now has not cleared itself of the 40 generations of trauma. And so as I go into that 40 people, if I'm in that for any amount of time, if I'm in any relationship for any amount of time, and it's probably in the order of a couple days, it doesn't seem to happen in those first few hours of a communication. You meet somebody new and you've got this deep curiosity. If you're present, you're going to be curious about what you're seeing in that other person. If you look into their eyes, you're going to fall in love in 2 minutes, is what the saying is, right? Look into somebody else's eyes for 2 minutes, you fall in love. That reality only persists for a period of time until suddenly people start projecting onto this new entity that is a relationship. And so you spend enough hours together and suddenly there's a new energy field. And for some reason, the tendency of humans is to immediately project against that new screen their insecurities, their fears, their guilt, their shame, ultimately their fear that this new thing might be the thing they've been looking for. And now they're afraid that they're going to lose this thing that they were looking for. And so then I withdraw from that situation and be like, okay, I need to back up a little bit so that I'm not the screen for this projection here. And so then you're back in your own space again, and then you go insane. And so then you got to go reconnect again, and then you're in that space again. So I think we just have to have so much grace on one another right now, so much patience for the human moment, because we are stuck in this trap, really, which is we can feel the power to connect. We can feel how much we could potentially do together, and yet we inevitably reduce that back down to some previously learned pattern of, well, maybe this is my better half. Well, maybe this is the job I should go do. Oh, that person's doing something cooler than I am. Maybe I'm not good enough to do my podcast, or maybe I'm not good enough to go create the companies that I think I can do. Maybe I actually am not, a wisdom keeper. That person seems way further down the road than I feel. And so all of these, constructs of insecurities and fears and guilt and shame start getting projected in there. Mm. I'm intrigued about what your generation is going to do.
Yeah. And, I think we really dissolved a lot of those projections and constructs in Egypt. And it was beautiful to witness. I don't know if you were aware of this, but we all had the opportunity. You brought up the King's Chamber. We all had the opportunity to go into the sarcophagus, which they never found a body in there. It's just a rose granite limestone box that's just in there, in a huge room that's empty. And we all got the opportunity to go inside. And I was the person that was right after you, inside the King's Chamber. And I got to witness all the beauty, all the transformation, the transmutation that happened within you. If you're open to touching on that experience, because I feel like we've talked a lot about what it's like to, be in these ecstatic moments, but really what information came through for you in that chamber. I feel like it was a very transformational experience for all of us, but especially being witness to you, it was mind-blowing and very heart-opening to see.
I'm not sure if my screen is still working on your end, but in my midway through my last communication there, my whole screen froze and went into a weird state, which is not too unusual when I start to forget that we're in a three-dimensional space. I tend to break electronics. So are you still hearing me and seeing me okay?
I see you. And I know that happens a lot with these types of conversations.
It's better this way that the screen is blitzed out. Yeah, I mean, to suggest that I remember what happened in the sarcophagus, or let alone just the whole night in the King's Chamber at this point, it would be, I experienced it at such a deep level that it became me, and so no need to remember it as that I am whatever was achieved that night. You had a three-dimensional perception of me better than I did, because I was, not seeing myself in that three-dimensionality at that moment. And so you probably would remember maybe what was physically happening, or maybe what the sounds were, or whatever it was. But I get into this space, very quickly through a lot of different modalities. And I seem to end up in a very similar space each time, which is in an experience where there's a gray field, I guess is what I would describe it. And it's infinite in all directions. And there's a grid that holds space in its, structure, or in its centropic capacity to create order out of chaos. And so you can see that grid. And with every time that I drop into these spaces, my favorite ways to get there are through breath work or through sound bath, and sound bath meditation or breath work. For me, this is how it happens, and for each of you, it will be different. You all have experienced getting into your quantum field reality in different ways, and you're going to have a different experience than I do. But in the King's Chamber, it takes me some time. Maybe it took, I don't know, minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes or something like that to get there. But I'd been in that space for hours by the time I got into the sarcophagus. And I generally stay very rooted in a space when this happens to me. When I get into this space, and in the King's Chamber, I think I happen to be standing at one end of the chamber, exactly in the opposite position of the sarcophagus, looking back towards that, and Matthias de Stefano was on the other side, around the sarcophagus in his movement. And I remember becoming so rooted to that spot that it starts to feel, you start to experience that as a still point within the universe. And then as soon as you become still in the universe, you can actually gather an enormous amount of information very, very, very quickly. And that's ultimately what I would invite all of you to start to practice is, can you go into so much stillness that you become the focal point of gravity, that grid that holds space-time gravity grid, that holds the capacity for multidimensional stability, is essentially constantly filled with motion. There's energy flowing through it in all directions, but among the flows of energy are points of stillness, and the majority of the universe is in that still state. It could be called a vector equilibrium, and mathematically it means that all of the forces of motion are perfectly balanced to create stillness. And that's what most of vacuum space is within the universe. And then movement tends to be a very small percentage of the universe. Movement then creates physical matter, as it coalesces into gravitational fields that we may call black holes or the rest. And we can create particle out of the waves of energy in the universe. And those particles are space dust, and then coalesce into stars, planets, whatever. But that particle state is such a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the universe. And so when you become still, you immediately connect to all of the stillness within the universe. And within that stillness is so much information. And so that's one body of information to connect to. But I almost feel like that's more the gravity. Like once you've connected to all of the stillness, you're now capable of having, that.
Zach, can you hear me, brother? Okay. My apologies for interrupting you, but it stopped recording on your end. It's asking me if you could refresh your page. We blew that technology out. You're back.
Oh yeah, the screen just came back alive here. I can see you again. All right.
There we are. We're back. Right.
Where'd you lose me at?
I could hear you the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah, so you could flow.
I can't quite remember where I was, but it's essentially we're in that state of stillness that then allows us to access all of this information. And once you get used to accessing all that information, you can, the bank accounts. And so keeping the bank accounts near zero, and this drives my finance team crazy, and my company is literally crazy, because anytime there's money sitting in there, we leverage it for more creativity, more growth, more new companies, whatever it is. And so I developed an innovation hub, kind of parent company that then can have infinite number of projects running within it, and it can self-seed. And so if there's income coming in from any of the entities within it, that can be cycled back into R&D or development for other ones. And so for 14 years, been kind of working towards that. For the 10 years that machine has been running, we've created an amazing amount of ingenuity and some really breakthrough products in a lot of seemingly disparate places, software development, human health, and biotech, and energy companies, and all kinds of stuff. And so that the abundance that has come out of that is kind of psychotic. I started the whole thing with cashing in my 401k for $10,000. I got my $10,000 out and started the first project, and it's now become hundreds of millions of dollars of value. That $10,000 beginning goes so exponential because I had a high tolerance for zero in the bank account. A lot of money flowed through, so it was actually a massive amount of energy. But the way in which the Earth, the 3D humans want you to look at that is a zero. you have to start to come to trust that it is the flow of energy, not the holding of energy, that actually creates reality. And so if you have lots of zeros on the end of your, one on your bank account, and you've got those thousands of dollars or tens of thousands or 100,000 or millions of dollars stored up, you've broken the organic system of energy. And so you are no longer contributing to value within the biologic reality that we live in, within the physics reality that we live in. And so, and I don't care what the end month number is, but if that number keeps going up, then there's something you're doing that is keeping you from trusting the universe. You are in a scarcity model if you have an increasing level of sense of security and sense of identity because you have lots of zeros at the end of the one. And so think about that for yourself. Like, how am I utilizing energy that we might call money? And what I've learned over the years is the way to go exponential in your impact and your real wealth in the world is every dollar comes in, leverage it for a new relationship. Who can be, hired as a consultant into this project to take us to another level? Who can I connect with internationally? So, what team needs to go travel? Who needs to be brought into our circles so that they can, that person can enrich the soil in which we're growing from. So start to look at your, monetary resources, be them US dollars or cryptocurrency or whatever the heck you're using these days, and acknowledge that all of that is BS. None of that is real. Crypto, US dollars, all of that's a fantastic, conflagration of reality, but use it. Use that for connection to other people. The only thing real that you're going to take out of this life is relationships. The constellation of souls connecting is the only thing that you're going to take forward. And I've sat at enough deathbeds to know this without question, is that nobody takes their bank account to the other side. Nobody tells me at the end of their life how many millions of dollars they have in bank account. Nobody. And I've sat with, your billionaires dying. I've sat with, your most impoverished people. They never mention their monetary worth. It's just not in their awareness when they're at this veil between the worlds, when they pierce that veil and see the other side. They all want to tell you about the relationships they had. They'll tell you about their children for sure, but it's often surprising. Like at the deathbed, it's so common that I'm hearing stories. These are their last few breaths. This is their last few seconds as a human being. And what they want to tell you about is this one woman that they met who was this elder and it caught them by surprise when they were 20 years old and said something that really changed the course of their life. And that's what they want to tell you. And sometimes they don't even remember the person's name, but they remember that soul interacted with mine and it changed everything. And I'm so grateful for that moment. I'm so grateful for that. And I can see how that played out in my life now as I've dipped across the veil. I know the purpose of that moment. So you probably in your current state of health don't know what are the pivotal souls that you've touched, because they probably weren't your partners, your girlfriends, your boyfriends. They weren't your teachers or professors. They weren't your guru. They weren't your yoga instructor. There's Carlos Castaneda is one of my favorite authors out there, and one of his books, Journey of Ixalan, has come back on my radar again with one of my friends and colleagues that's been living in my house recently. Picked up the book off one of my shelves and read it, and now has read it a few times and was telling me about it and reminding me of things when I was last home. And so I've picked it back up and I'm going back through it, and I love this book for so many reasons. There's so much deep wisdom in this very short book. So if you haven't read Carlos Castaneda's Journey to Ixalan, pick that one up. But there's this beautiful thing where he's basically training this academician. That's why maybe the book resonates with me. I spent 17 years in academia learning all this stuff through education, and then I had to unlearn it so that I could start to learn. And so he's got this academician who's come out into the surreals of Mexico or whatnot to learn indigenous thought. And one of the beautiful things he's doing is training this man to be what he calls a warrior. And to be a warrior, you become so alert and so aware of so many things. But one of my favorite little pieces of the book is he says, there's something that I call the cubic centimeter of opportunity. Everybody has a cubic centimeters of opportunity that are going to happen, but only a warrior will be so present that he sees the cubic centimeter and grabs it before it disappears. So that's that cubic centimeter of opportunity that happened when that woman spoke to the individual to change their life course. And at their deathbed, they remember that cubic centimeter of opportunity that they took. And so I encourage all of you to start looking for your cubic centimeters of opportunity. Become so still that these become very obvious to you, and they become gleaming gems within the landscape of your life, and you're able to see them from even perhaps a bit of a distance, and then when they're right in front of you, you are able to grab onto that opportunity and shoot right through the portal that thing is in your life. Go into that new reality through that gem of that quarter centimeter of, or that cubic centimeter of opportunity.
I feel that humanity as a whole right now is at that cubic center of opportunity. I was in Malibu last April when you had the chance to sit down with Blue and Richard for a beautiful conversation. I watched it for the third time today, and there's so much to unpack in that conversation. But I think one of the main things of the opportunity that we're facing as humankind is this complete form shift that you talked about, where you are theorizing that we not only have 22 amino acids, but potentially 26, and that new proteins are going to be created from that are going to unleash full potential for our species, and we're going to be able to hold more light energy. What does this all have to do with the feminine and the water structure right now inside of our bodies? What are we seeing with these new potentials, this form shift in our species, the cubic opportunity of humanity?
Yeah. That's a deep question. I mean, that takes us back to kind of the origin of, the human wound and the human construct when you ask about the feminine there. But it's clear that DNA holds its current structure of a double helix because of the structure of water. So we can start there. So DNA can only go into that three-dimensional structure that we call a double helix that was uncovered by crystallography by Watson and Crick back in the 1950s, 60s there, and with more detail. But that strand of DNA in this double helix has captured the imagination of humans ever since. And you can just look at the number of times that DNA double helixes show up now in like people's websites and people's Instagram feeds and people's, anytime you see somebody doing like a new age piece of art, there's DNA strand somewhere in there and all that. So it's really captured our imagination, that structure. So there's something in there that's beautiful to look at, beautiful to do. But the problem of story is that as soon as we hear a story and then we believe it's our reality, or believe it's the totality of our reality, we limit ourselves. And so we are currently looking at the crystallography of DNA, which continues to be done at higher and higher resolutions and more better technologies today than we had when the DNA strand was first demonstrated as a double helix. But what we've now learned in the recent, quantum physics of biology is that you can't get that arcing bend of a double helix unless it's the water molecules that have lined up along the nucleotides that form the DNA. And it's the interaction of the water charges that then create this twisting motion that we call a double helix. And so when we look at the structure of DNA, we're really looking at the structure of water, or the geometry within the water, relationships within a cell. It's important to remember that water inside of a cell is not liquid state. So any living cell, be it a bacteria or a human cell or whatever it is, any single cell that's holding biology within it is converted liquid water into a liquid crystal. And that liquid crystal holds a physical state of what feels like gel, like a jello kind of consistency, in the same way that your liquid turns into a solid when you're making jello. Your cells use energy, an electromagnetic field gradient across the plasma membrane of a cell that literally creates plasma. And we call it a plasma membrane, I think for good reason, because there's so much electrical charge held across there. A single cell has these microcurrents there, so tiny amount of electricity, but the proximity of those two charges, because of the tiny membrane and that's very high insulative properties, creates a gradient of charge from the outside of the cell into the side of the cell as it goes across that plasma membrane. The change in charge is so rapid that it can create plasma phenomenon. And so water, as it shoots through that plasma membrane, goes into the gel state and turns into jello. And liquid crystals are capable of holding light, and that's why your radio or whatever made that innovation from tubes in the 1940s and 50s to the innovation of solid state, radio as it was called. That's when the liquid crystals were kind of discovered as resonance chambers for light energy, and they could resonate with the different frequencies of different channels that were coming in. And suddenly you didn't need the big tubes. You could take that down to 10,000 times smaller to a little liquid crystal. So liquid crystals resonate and hold light energy in the electromagnetic field. So your cells are liquid crystals. These are receivers and transceivers of information through taking vibrational information and putting it in relationship to physical expression of molecules, especially water. So your liquid crystal is vibrating, and in the vibration of that liquid crystal, it's going to form complex structures, just like a quartz crystal or this in my friend's house right now. This looks like pyrite here. So pyrite is a piece of ore that's very specific to its crystalline structure, and it gives us the perception of the color that the human eye then picks up as gold. It gives us a perception of sparkle as light refracts off of it. All of that is the properties of a crystal. Your cell has properties of a crystal that are very specifically human. And this is probably why humans with the same DNA of a pig can build a human body and a human way of relating rather than pig. But we have the same DNA. It's been shown that we have identical DNA to pigs. It's just rearranged in 178 puzzle pieces into a slightly different sequence, but it's the same genes, same template for life. And yet one's a pig, one's a human, and the difference seems to be the form in which the liquid crystal is taking. So in the same way that the minerals in pyrite are damn similar to a bunch of other different crystals, one looks like quartz, one looks like pyrite. And it's because the water structure in which those crystals organized was probably different within the geology of the planet. And so you get this water frequency or information stream, and then any minerals coming into that are going to organize themselves differently. There's only 96 elements or whatever on the periodic chart, and those 90 elements can become hundreds of thousands of different structures. Glass versus steel. These things are just differences in expression of the same minerals ultimately that have been gone through different relationships to the plasma field and to the water within their space. So ultimately we're in this very fluid state of reality, and DNA is only holding the double strand because of our current relationship to water in the human being. Is there an opportunity, is the intriguing question, for the geometry of the water within our liquid crystal to shift? And if we do that, then we can hold a completely different relationship for nucleotides to organize themselves in there. We create a different crystalline structure. And then what do I become? What does my mineral structure look like? What crystal do I form in the three-dimensionality of existing as an expression of this water and the vibration of the cosmos, if I am capable of holding a more complex geometry in my water? And I believe that's what we're striving for ultimately, in a weird way, is when I go into stillness and I suddenly experience all of this information field that I didn't perceive a moment ago. I think I'm making my water available to new information, and that new information, as an energy field, has the permission or capacity to change the geometry within my water. It's very esoteric on one level, and yet it almost seems obvious on another. A snowflake or your pyrite versus quartz, all of these are physical expressions of the water that's holding information that then rearranges the minerals in the periodic chart to do something different. And so I think humans have the capacity to do something different. I think all biology has opportunity to do something different. And the reason I'm so sure of that is because I've been watching it happen through all of human history. I'm watching it happen through all of biologic history on the planet, is each cell has the opportunity to do something new. And at moments, that becomes a complete form shift. There's a temptation for us to believe that evolution was a DNA process, and that's what's led to such, deep necessity for denial and, ignorance in our science, is because we keep trying to imprint a biologic origin story to life when it's actually a physics origin of everything. If you let go of the belief that evolution was a DNA thing where, there was an earthworm and then it became a snake and then the snake became a monkey somehow, and all this crazy stuff of like, well, maybe the DNA did this and the DNA did that, and then this gene happened and therefore this happened. It didn't happen that way. We have too much data in our geology looking at the history through fossils of life. It didn't happen in a progressive way. It didn't happen through some linear transmission of iterating DNA. It happened in these seismic leaps, sudden appearance of species that did not exist a moment before. Mammals came on the scene in a split second of history. The capacity for a blue whale to exist didn't exist a moment before that. And there was billions of years before blue whale. And then suddenly it was. And there was, millions of years then before suddenly human comes on the scene a split second ago. 300,000 years, 4 billion year history. 300,000 years is a freaking fingernail's width of time compared to that, through, billions of years of iteration and possibility. So I think these seismic leaps were happening in conformational changes of the water within the cells rather than the DNA. Horses came online suddenly, and then horses continued to iterate, and they became much larger, and they had much more muscle mass. And so that was, millions of years of progress of a new DNA, arrangement within a liquid crystal of a cell that said, I think horse is possible. And that horse became possible. And then the horse started iterating. So you can have these seismic leaps, and then you can have biologic iteration. But I think the seismic leaps are water shifts, not DNA shifts. The water shifts lead to massive genomic reorganization, massive reorganization of the minerals of the periodic chart to express new bodies that didn't exist a moment before. So if that has happened, and that's the mechanism, then we can do it again. And I believe that's what this earth is wanting right now. And so the earth is called in human nature. We like to believe ourselves separate from nature. That's why you look up the Oxford English Dictionary and it says nature is everything in the world around us. It's minerals, plants, animals, everything except humans or anything humans have created. And so literally in the definition of nature, we wrote ourselves and anything we've created right out of it. That's obviously not true. We are nature. We are nature expressing itself. And so why did nature express itself in a species that would ultimately take itself to a state of infertility and chronic disease to predict its own death, and in the process destroy the earth beneath its feet? Because nature wants to die over and over again, because it's in the death toll that we get to erase the memory of the previous iterations of life, and we get a new physical opportunity that then leads to a new biologic opportunity. And so that's the moment we are in, I believe, right now, as nature has devised a death moment for a rebirth to create something that has never existed before. And she gave the cause of that extinction pressure the capacity for information organization to find the patterns, to understand that. I don't know if the dinosaurs had an understanding that their extinction was designed to create birds, mammals. I don't think the fern necessarily knew that it was going through its death cycle so that we could have the emergence of deciduous trees and wildflowers. That all happened through the death. But now we are humans aware that this physical transformation is happening, that this extinction pressure is putting on us the possibility of newness. That's very intriguing because it means we could actually stay and play. Yes, extinction, but extinction of what? Extinction of the previous iterations of life, the previous iterations of sacred geometry within the water structure of every cell on this planet, and the new opportunity for a physical shift. whatever happened in the king's chamber, whatever happened in that sarcophagus, whatever happened in the field that I was in yesterday as I was meditating, whatever happens, tomorrow to all of us, is setting the stage for this event to occur. And so I love that you said you feel like humanity is in its cubic centimeter of opportunity. I could not agree more. We are in this prescient moment of opportunity, and we have been awake for a few split seconds to see the opportunity. And so more and more of us are feeling it, seeing it, tasting it, bringing it into our intuition, processing it in our intuitive senses, and then putting back out a new expression. There's, old information and new information that says that one time the human biology was actually able to hold a 12-stranded DNA. That's pretty cool geometry. And when you look at the necessary geometry for a 12-stranded DNA to exist, you've got to create an icosahedron in the crystal structure to hold 12 strands of DNA. And that was the basic geometry that was discovered to represent that is created by the anatomy of the human heart. And this was discovered mid-century, last century. Victor Schauberger was the one to, understand the complex, quaternary structure of the energy field that is created by the pumping motion and the exact rotation of the human heart. The human heart is rotated at a very specific axis that is different than my vertical axis. And it's its relationship in that twist to my vertical axis that it creates, some of this energy field shift. And that icosahedron is this fascinating structure. And so the possibility that a human heart is not just, something that loves things. I don't think it does. I think the heart is creating the liquid crystal capacity for vibrating in the frequency of love when we see beauty. The human heart is creating the capacity of a liquid crystal to occur that can hold energetic frequencies such that when our senses perceive beauty, we vibrate in a frequency that we have come in the English language to call love. It's a frequency that causes growth in everything. When you love a plant, it increases its root system expression. All the hormones kick in, growth factors, etc. And you get a more intense root system expression that brings nutrients up and goes through this beautiful, kind of growth phase. And so we are, a technology developed over billions of years of the cosmos to be able to hold these frequencies within our liquid crystal structure to create more complex ways that we rearrange DNA. And just in the last couple of years, we have seen four-stranded DNA for the first time in human cells. And that's amazing to me. This is just in the last couple of years, crystallography has suddenly captured four-stranded DNA. You think, wow, I wonder if that happened in a yogi. I wonder if that happened in like some super meditator. I wonder if it happened, in some great teacher, some scientist. No, it happens inside cancer cells. The only cells capable of four-stranded DNA right now are cancer cells. I find that really freaking fascinating. And of course, the literature that you read on this is like, well, the four-stranded DNA must be a broken, dysfunctional state because it's happening in cancer. Like, are you kidding me? You really have justified the fact that you are so convinced that cancer is like this enemy, this attacking force on health, that it can only do darkness and it can only do bad things. It can't perhaps reach a capacity for a more complex water structure. I find my field of medicine just absolutely so crippled by judgment and by old stories of belief of good and bad and evil, and at the biological level, it just doesn't exist. There is no good and evil inside of a human cell. There's frequencies that are interpreted to become real physical structures, and it's beautiful. So my interpretation of four-stranded DNA inside of cancer cells leads us to a really easy path forward, a really beautiful path forward, I believe. The phenomenon of cancers, this is, back to my cancer days. So I used to develop chemotherapy for, unique endocrine cancers that didn't have any treatment for them. So that was my role at the University of Virginia. I had my own little lab creating novel chemotherapy agents out of vitamin A compounds to kill. And actually, it was cool because we weren't killing the cells. We were actually turning on the mechanisms of cell suicide. So the cancer cell would just eliminate itself rather than need to be poisoned. And so it was this, passive concept of chemotherapy where it's actually, nutrifying the cell. When you give enough nutrient down these single pathways, it forces the cell to realize that it needs to eliminate itself. It's probably not even a forcing. It invites the cell to eliminate itself. And so it was a beautiful part of my journey and part of my, scientific, aha moments. But what I learned in that process of studying cancer every day under the microscope is that a cancer cell is simply the most isolated cell from the human organism. And once a cell reaches complete isolation, it becomes a cancer cell, period. No matter, and this is different than if you read, a carcinogen story of what causes cancer. It's breaks in the DNA is a current belief in the scientific dogma. A lot of scientists don't believe that's, the cause anymore. They think that's the symptom. That's probably true. But if you go to medical school right now, they're going to teach you that anything that breaks DNA strands is a carcinogen. Cancer is the accumulation of genetic injuries. The average cancer cell has 20,000 unrepaired genetic injuries, and which is pretty dramatic because we only have 20,000 genes. So you've got this deep, unrepaired state of the DNA, and then you get a cancer cell. Well, if that's the case, then it takes about 17 to 20 years to accumulate that much unrepaired genetic, data. And what I've seen under the microscope again and again is a couple seconds of exposure of human cells to glyphosate, which is the most common chemical we're all exposed to now. A couple seconds of that can isolate a human cell, and immediately it takes on the phenotype of cancer cells. Immediately. And so cancer is not something that has to develop through genetic. Instead, isolation can occur in a split second. And as soon as isolation cancer occurs, and then as that cancer cell slowly percolates and realizes that it can't repair itself, it starts to try to reproduce, and it can't reproduce well. And so in reproduction is kind of a creative process. It fails in its creative capacity to create something new and just starts copying itself. And so it's a very low frequency, low resonance, pattern of survival, but it's trying to survive because it thinks it's the only cell left. It thinks it's the only iteration of life because it's been disconnected from its environment. And so all it can do is divide. And so that's what we call a tumor. It's a single cell that's now just repeating itself, becomes a tumor and becomes very metabolically demanding. It can kill the person by just sucking energy out of the bigger organism. And the whole time it's unaware that it's actually part of this bigger organism. Until you nurture it enough, if you give it enough nutrients, it suddenly, realizes, oh my gosh, I'm just the most damaged cell in the body. I need to eliminate myself. Stem cells will replace me. All's good. And eliminates itself. And then you go on without cancer. So that was kind of my chemotherapy era of excitement of like, wow, this is going to be a totally new paradigm. And then the pharmaceutical industry shut that down. All kinds of weird things happened. But the learning wasn't so much around, cancer needs to be nurtured back into our bodies to allow health to occur, which is a beautiful thing. You should all kind of listen to that and go do that in your life, go nurture all your cells back in yourself. But the cooler thing when we're looking at this DNA thing is that the cancer cell, because it became disconnected from the larger organism, started to lose the memory of the organism. And so the memory is held in water structure. Water is the only molecule that has memory to it. And that's why homeopathy works. So the herb doesn't work at infinitum, but if you put the herb in water and then eliminate the herb and the water has the memory of the herb, that's a much more potent medicine than the echinacea ever was. And so the water has memory, and in its memory, it has the ability to change its geometry, and that geometry becomes, a method for materializing reality around it. And so if we are carrying forward in our water structure all of the last 40 generations of trauma, we have degraded our frequency resonance of our water structure, and we can only hold a two-stranded DNA. For those cells that become isolated from that greater, water memory of all the journey and everything else, and DNA starts to break, and so you start to lose your relationship to your previous expression of this 23 came from mom, this 23 came from dad, and I'm repeating the biology of my past. As the cancer cell gets closer and closer to its death, it's getting closer and closer to a fresh slate. And then suddenly fourth dimension shift happens. The plasma structure changes, the water structure changes, and suddenly you get four-stranded DNA. And so being able to erase the memory of the previous generation seems, I believe, to be a really cool path forward for achieving the capacity for more and more complex geometry within our liquid crystals. So that'll play out. Maybe people prove me wrong in that whole, experiential learning that I've experienced, but it's phenomenally cool that the science is starting to show us these paths forward, and they are basically, reiterating or showing us the same information that thousands of years of spiritual wisdom have shown us, which is if you go into stillness, to let go of all of your previous stories and beliefs and everything that has shaped your sense of reality, then a new reality happens. You can go read, the Christ story. You can go read the Buddha story. You can go read, Muhammad. Go read whoever, and you're going to hear the same damn thing. Go into stillness, erase the past, have absolutely no mental concern or awareness of the future. Become so present that everything self-organizes around you, and then you will have a new life. And the new life is this resurrection energy or regeneration energy. It's been called many things, but it is literally the thing that takes, plasma fields and suddenly creates the possibility of horse. And so I am curious about what I am possible. You asked me what I'm excited about at the beginning. I am excited to find out if I get to play in this new space of new water structures within my own cellular structure. So I'm starting these immersive retreats. Did one in Bali this past year, but I think my first ones are in this new iteration are going to be down in Mexico. So hopefully some of you will come join me. But I want to take 30, 40 people at a time, just as we did in Egypt, into these spaces where we can express new energetic experiences and change the transformation or conformation of your water structure so that you can hold more and more complex beauty within your cellular structures, including the DNA. And I want to see if you can create new proteins. I want to see if you can create new genetic sequences. I want to see if you can create, the horse we can't imagine. Can you become unicorn? Who knows? Like what can you become if we hold you in a vibrational space of safety and truth that allows you to reorganize and up-level that expression. And that's, I think, Emilio, what you're experiencing in Egypt, just as I did. Each of us left that changed. We absolutely knew without a shadow of doubt that nobody would leave that place the same person that had come. And it's playing out so quickly. You've had a bunch of people on your podcast. People's companies are up leveling or changing. People are closing previous projects, starting new projects. So their sudden new awareness is like so much more crystal clear. So I'm excited for these, immersive retreats, 4 days at a time, to just give people these vessels to parametrically change, massive, paradigm shifting, advances in your own cellular structures, because you have a new relationship to everything. Everything is in a state of abundance. You realize everything is here for ecstasy. Even our pain is here for ecstasy. Even our discomfort is leading us into the solutions and leading us to the antidotes to our current dream. Sometimes you need pain to wake up from thing. Somebody's passed out, you slap their face and they come to. Maybe we just need to be slapped really freaking hard right now. And that's why we're creating so much friction and pain in the dream, is so that we will wake up. We'll find out when we do wake up. We'll find out why we did everything and how it all worked and all that. Some fantastic stuff. And maybe we have to let go of the 3-dimensional bodies and die our physical deaths to get to that point where we can see all those patterns and see all the beauty of it and see why the pain existed and why we created the pain to achieve the things we did and why we created the traumas in our own life so that we could achieve what we achieved and whatever it is in the quantum field. So it's the divine playing itself out in this magnificent thing that we call biology and life, and we're all part of the dance. So honored to be with all of you.
Brother, thank you so much for just taking me to that space, that field of no time. I know you have a call right now, but I could continue talking to you for hours and hours and hours, brother. I'm so deeply grateful for this brotherhood that we've developed, and just learning from you has opened not only my physical eyes, but my spiritual eyes as well. So I know we will have to continue this conversation, brother. I'll leave you to it, but with all the love in my heart possible, I'm sending it your way, and to whoever is tuning into this conversation. We'll link everything about you in the show notes. If there's anything you want to specifically send people to, let us know.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Awesome. I appreciate the conversation. All of you listening, thanks for being part of this co-creation.